There is a moment in Back to the Future that most people have watched a dozen times without ever noticing anything wrong. It slides right past you, hidden inside one of the most beloved scenes in the whole trilogy. But once someone points it out, you can never unsee it again. And the strange part is that this single mistake is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the flying DeLorean, the flux capacitor, and the perfectly quotable one-liners, there is a tangled web of near disasters, last-minute casting swaps, injured actors, lawsuits, and tiny continuity slip-ups that somehow never got fixed. Today we are pulling back the curtain on all of it, starting with how this movie almost never got made at all. It is strange to imagine now, given how deeply Back to the Future is stitched into pop culture, but there was a time when almost nobody in Hollywood wanted anything to do with it. Director Robert Zemeckis and writer Bob Gale had been working together for years by the early 1980s, kicking around ideas and chasing the kind of breakout success that had so far eluded them. The concept for a time travel comedy about a teenager who accidentally interferes with his own parents' romance came together around 1980, and the two of them believed they had something special. Studio after studio disagreed. More than 40 production companies passed on the script. The reasoning varied from executive to executive, but a common complaint kept surfacing. The story was not raunchy enough. This was the era of raucous, R-rated teen comedies, and Back to the Future was something gentler, something built for a family audience rather than a crowd looking for shock value. Studios assumed that meant it would not sell tickets. Zemeckis and Gale kept pitching anyway, convinced that the warmth and cleverness of the story would eventually win someone over. The turning point came when Zemeckis directed Romancing the Stone, a box office hit that suddenly made him a director worth betting on. Universal Pictures, which had shown some interest earlier, came back around, and the project that had been rejected dozens of times finally found a home. It is worth sitting with that for a second. One of the most successful and beloved films of the 1980s was one green light away from never existing in the form we know it. Everyone associates the role of Marty McFly with Michael J. Fox, and for good reason. His energy, his comic timing, and his chemistry with Christopher Lloyd feel completely inseparable from the character. But Fox was not the actor standing in front of the cameras when filming began. Fox had actually been the first choice for the role from the very start, but there was a scheduling conflict. He was tied up filming the sitcom Family Ties, and the producers of that show would not release him to work on a feature film at the same time. With their top pick unavailable, Zemeckis and Gale moved forward with a different young actor named Eric Stoltz. Stoltz was talented, and the production actually shot several weeks of footage with him in the role. But as filming continued, something felt off to Zemeckis. Stoltz was playing Marty with a heavier, more dramatic tone, when the role really called for a lighter, more comedic touch. It became clear that the chemistry the film needed simply was not there. Rather than push forward with a performance that did not fit, Zemeckis made an extremely costly decision. He fired Stoltz and went back to Fox, who by that point had found a way to make his schedule work. Recasting the lead role after weeks of filming meant reshooting nearly everything Stoltz had already done, and it added roughly $4 million to the budget. It was a financial gamble that could have sunk the production. Instead, it saved the movie. The moment Fox stepped into the role, the tone clicked into place, and the rest is history. Interestingly, Stoltz is not completely erased from the final film. If you watch closely during the diner scene where Marty punches Biff, something looks slightly different. The lighting shifts, and Biff's face looks just a touch different than it does elsewhere. Actor Thomas F. Wilson, who played Biff, has said he believes that particular punch actually connects with Stoltz rather than Fox, a leftover fragment from the footage that never got res hot. It is a small, easy-to-miss piece of movie history hiding in plain sight. There is also a wider shot in the mall parking lot chase, when the DeLorean is being pursued by the Libyan terrorists. Because the shot is filmed from a distance and the driver's face is not visible, that footage was also kept from the original filming with Stoltz rather than being redone with Fox. The production simply did not need to reshoot everything, only the scenes where the switch would be obvious. Once Fox was locked in, he threw himself into the physical demands of the role in a way that few actors would bother to do for a teen comedy. Marty McFly is not just a funny, likable kid. He rides a skateboard like he has been doing it his whole life, shreds a guitar solo on stage in front of a packed gymnasium, fires a gun with confidence in the Old West, and even learns to ride a horse for the third film. Fox decided early on that he did not want any of it to look faked. He described the experience of making the trilogy as feeling like being back in school constantly, except every subject was a physical skill instead of an academic one. One week he was working with a music teacher to nail the fingering for a rock guitar solo. Another week he was learning how to properly fall off a skateboard without hurting himself, or how to convincingly aim and fire a prop pistol. By his own account, he ended up picking up what felt like 100 different specialized skills over the course of the 3 films, only to forget most of them again once shooting wrapped, since there was no reason to keep practicing horseback riding or lasso tricks in his everyday life. That dedication shows most clearly in the school dance sequence, where Marty performs Johnny B. Good. Fox already knew how to play guitar from his teenage years, but he wanted this performance to look flawless, not just adequate. The music for the scene had already been fully recorded in the studio, so Fox worked with a guitar teacher named Paul Hansen to break the song down note by note until his hand movements matched the pre-recorded track exactly. He also worked with a choreographer to build out the stage moves, drawing inspiration from classic rock performers of decades past. The result is a scene that still gets people up out of their seats decades later, entirely because an actor decided that faking it was not good enough. As the trilogy progressed, particularly in the sequels, the story required something that seems simple on paper but is genuinely difficult to pull off on camera. Multiple versions of the same character occupying the same frame, sometimes even interacting with each other. Since there was only one Michael J. Fox, and ordinary cameras cannot capture 2 performances of the same actor moving and reacting to one another in real time, the production needed a technical solution. Zemeckis turned to Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects company founded by George Lucas, and asked them to build a specialized rig capable of solving the problem. What they created was a robotic, motion-controlled camera system nicknamed the VistaGlide. The system could record a camera's exact movement path during one take, then repeat that identical movement precisely during a second take with the actor performing a different role or a different version of the character. By carefully aligning the 2 passes, the effects team could composite them together into a single, seamless shot where it truly looks like 2 Martys are standing in the same room, talking to one another. Zemeckis later explained that the challenge was less about the special effects wizardry and more about logistics, figuring out a repeatable system that let 2 performances by the same actor exist convincingly in a single frame, without any visible seams. It worked so well that even now, watching those scenes with modern eyes, they hold up remarkably well against movies with vastly larger visual effects budgets. Not every behind-the-scenes story from this franchise is a light-hearted one. One of the more serious controversies involves actor Crispin Glover, who played George McFly, Marty's awkward and easily pushed-around father, in the original film. Glover brought a strange, deliberately mannered energy to the role that fans still remember fondly. But when the second film went into production, Glover was nowhere to be found, even though George McFly clearly appears throughout the movie. The explanation is uncomfortable. Rather than simply casting a different actor to play an older version of George and moving forward, the filmmakers took a different route. During production of the first film, a mold had been made of Glover's face, likely for makeup or prosthetic purposes. For the sequel, the production used that existing mold to create prosthetic pieces, then applied those prosthetics to a different actor, Jeffrey Weissman, so that from a distance, the character would still resemble Glover closely enough to pass. Glover was furious when he learned what had happened, and importantly, his objection was not about someone else stepping into the role. He has explained that if the production had simply hired another actor to play an older George McFly and left it at that, he would have had no issue whatsoever, calling that a completely legitimate and fair approach. What upset him was that his actual likeness, his face, had been used to create the illusion that he himself was in the film, without his permission, and without proper compensation for that use. The dispute escalated into a lawsuit, and the case was eventually settled outside of court. But its impact reached far beyond one franchise. The Glover case became an important reference point in entertainment law regarding how far production can go in using an actor's physical likeness without their direct consent, a question that has only grown more urgent in the modern era of digital face swapping and AI-generated likenesses. In hindsight, Glover was raising concerns about identity and consent years before most of the industry had any language for that conversation at all. There is a second layer to why Glover did not return for the sequel, separate from the face mold controversy. He also had genuine creative disagreements with how the first film wrapped up. In the closing scenes of the original movie, Marty returns to a 1985 where his family's life has visibly improved. The house looks nicer, his parents seem more confident and successful, and even the car parked in the driveway is a step up from where the story began. Glover reportedly felt uncomfortable with the implication that fixing the family's emotional problems should also come with a financial reward, arguing that genuine affection and connection should have been framed as the real prize, not material comfort. On top of the creative friction, Glover was also offered noticeably less money for the sequel than co-stars like Lea Thompson and Thomas F. Wilson, which only deepened his frustration. Between the pay gap, the disagreement over the story's message, and the unresolved anger over the face mold, Glover chose to walk away from the franchise entirely. Glover's strong opinions about his character did not stay confined to script disagreements. During production of the first film, tension boiled over into an actual on-set argument. Glover had specific ideas about a small physical detail for George McFly, wanting his character to be holding a broomstick during a particular scene. Zemeckis disagreed with the choice, and what should have been a quick creative discussion turned into a genuinely heated confrontation. The argument reportedly grew loud enough that other cast members retreated to their dressing rooms rather than stay anywhere nearby. Fox later described peeking his head out of his own dressing room during the commotion and locking eyes with Christopher Lloyd, who had done the exact same thing from his own room down the hall. The two actors shared a look of pure relief that, for once, the drama happening on set had absolutely nothing to do with either of them. It is a small anecdote, but it says a lot about how much creative passion and occasional friction went into shaping even the smallest details of this world. Few jokes in film history have aged into something quite as strange and delightful as the exchange between Marty and Doc Brown about the sitting president. When Marty casually mentions that Ronald Reagan is president back in 1985, Doc reacts with total disbelief, blurting out the actor as though the very idea is absurd. For audiences at the time, the line worked on two levels. It was funny simply because Doc's reaction is so over the top, but it was also a knowing wink at Reagan's real biography. Long before he entered politics, Reagan had built an entire career as a film actor throughout the late 1930s into the early 1960s, appearing in dozens of movies. The joke poked fun at how unlikely his path from Hollywood to the White House might have seemed to someone from an earlier decade. What makes the story even better is how Reagan himself reacted. Rather than being offended by a movie poking fun at his own background, he reportedly loved the joke so much that he had his personal projectionist rewind the scene and play it again immediately. He was clearly paying close attention to the film as a whole because in 1986 he referenced it directly during his State of the Union address, borrowing Doc Brown's famous closing line about not needing roads to talk about the country's future. It is an almost unheard of moment, a sitting president quoting a joke from a movie that was, in part, gently mocking his own unlikely career change. By the time the sequel went into development, the writing team faced an unusual challenge. How do you follow up a story that already felt complete? According to Bob Gale, the earliest draft of the sequel's plot looked completely different from what eventually made it to screen. Instead of jumping forward to a future timeline and then back to relive the events of the first film, the original plan involved sending Marty back to the late 1960s, where his mother Lorraine would be reimagined as a rebellious flower child type of character, who ends up arrested. Gale has described the early concept as one where Doc Brown himself would be shown getting high, a wildly different tone from anything that ended up in the finished trilogy. Zemeckis eventually steered the story in a different direction entirely. Rather than inventing an entirely new decade to explore, he suggested revisiting the events of the original film from a new angle, showing audiences the same night from 1955, but now overlapping with an older Marty and Doc moving through the background of scenes fans already knew by heart. It was a structurally ambitious choice that had rarely, if ever, been attempted in mainstream